before the world collapsed into bombs and trenches, before war devoured the dreams of an entire generation, there was only pure and simple love between two young people. His name was Leon. She was Clara. There wasn't much luxury in the life they led, but there was lightness, and, often, it is in lightness that the truest feelings find space to flourish. Leon worked in his father's bakery, a strict but honest man. Clara was a teacher at a small school in the city, where she taught children to write their first names with crooked and proud strokes. They met at a local party, in the community hall decorated with hanging lights and the smell of cornmeal cake in the air. Leon didn't know how to dance, but he tried anyway. He tripped over his own foot, made Clara laugh, and there, in the middle of that mess, something was born. Something that neither of them knew how to name at the time, but that over time turned out to be love. They started with simple meetings, walks in the late afternoon, notes left under the door, promises made in a low voice and with a racing heart. Leon wrote clumsy poems for her, and Clara collected each one as if it were jewelry. "You have the hands of a baker and the heart of a poet," she said, smiling. And he, silly in love, smiled back. On weekends, they would escape the city and go to the countryside, lying on the grass, watching the clouds pass by, talking about the future. Clara dreamed of opening a small private school. Leon wanted to learn more about baking and perhaps open his own bakery. Simple dreams, and in the middle of these dreams, there was always us. Get married, have children, grow old together. But the world outside had other plans. The whisper of war began as a distant report in the newspapers. Conflicts in other nations, political rumors, raised voices. Little by little, that whisper turned into a scream. When the first call-up announcements arrived, many still believed it would not last, that everything would be resolved in a few months, a common illusion, like all illusions before the storm. Leon was called, not because I wanted to fight, but because I felt like I had to. The sense of duty was strong among young people. That's what everyone said. Protect the homeland, protect your own. But deep down, he only thought about protecting Clara. I would fight for her. I would go back to her. I repeated this like a mantra, every night before going to sleep, with my chest tight and fear hidden behind borrowed courage. In the week before their departure, Clara and Leon lived as if time had frozen. Every second was savored with intensity. A touch of the hands turned into eternity. A kiss carried the weight of 1,000 promises. She cut his hair carefully. He arranged her things in the kitchen, as if it was already a husband and wife routine. But there was no time for marriage. War does not wait for unfinished love. The day before boarding, they went together to the old oak tree on the hill, where they had exchanged their first "I love you." Leon handed Clara a small wooden box. Inside was a simple ring, which he had made with wire and bread rings. "It's not pretty, but it's what I have now. When I get back, I'll give you a real one. But until then, use this one. For me," Clara cried. Not because it was a poor ring, but because it was a gesture full of everything that mattered most: delivery, hope, and love. "I'll wait for you," she said, through tears. "And I'm going back," he replied, with the firmness of someone who needs to believe this in order not to go crazy. And then, the war separated them. This was the beginning of a story that promised to be about reunions and happy endings. But life, like war, does not always follow the scripts that the heart writes. Leon left, taking with him the memory of Clara's smile and the aroma of fresh morning bread. Clara stayed, with her hand on her heart and her eyes focused on the road, where one day he would return, maybe different, older, maybe injured, but she believed he would. Their love was born in calm, but would be tested in chaos. And not all love, however sincere it may be, survives the changes of time. The train station seemed to breathe tension that day. A grey sky covered the city like a heavy blanket, and the sound of the locomotive in the distance echoed like a warning. Families gathered on the platform, shaking hands, giving hugs, saying everything their hearts didn't want to accept, that they were leaving, that they might not come back. And maybe that was the last touch, the last look, the last "I love you." Leon and Clara were in the crowd, but they seemed alone, as if the entire world had remained in the background, and there was only that moment. He has his backpack slung over his shoulders straight, trying to hide his fear. Her hands were shaking, holding the wire ring he had given her. There wasn't much to say. They had already said everything. But even so, the words came. rushed, interrupted by silences that hurt more than any sound. "Are you going to write?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Every day, if I can, even if they don't arrive, I'll write." Clara nodded, biting her lip to hold back the tears. She wanted to be strong for him. But how strong are you when your heart is about to be ripped out of your chest? How do you smile when the future is uncertain and the present seems to want to slip through your fingers? Leon took a small, folded letter from his pocket. "If anything happens to me, if one day you don't receive anything else, this letter is to be read only later. Promise you will only open it if necessary." She took the letter with hesitant hands. "I won't need it. You'll come back. I know you will." He tried to smile, and for a moment, the smile was real, because in that second, he believed. He believed because he needed to, because she believed. And that was all that sustained him. Movement increased around, whistles blowing, soldiers lining up, mothers crying, wives and girlfriends trying to commit their men's faces to memory. Clara hugged Leon tightly, as if she could keep him there with just her hug, as if her love was enough to protect him from bullets and bombs, from cold and hunger, from loneliness and death. "Don't forget me, okay?" she whispered. "Never. You're my home, Clara, and I'm going home." The train whistled again. Farewell became inevitable. He kissed her gently, lingeringly, kind of kiss that tries to preserve the taste, the smell, the time. Then he placed his forehead against hers. "You are everything to me." And then he let go of her hands. Clara wanted to chase it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say something else, anything, even if it was just to stay. But all he could do was stand there, motionless, with teary eyes and tight chest, watching Leon climb into the carriage. When the train started to move, he turned and waved. She waved back, her eyes fixed on him, as if she could hold him with just her gaze. And it stayed like that until the last moment, until he became just a figure in the window, and then, nothing. The sound of the train moving away was like an open wound. The station, which once seemed to pulse with emotions, now seemed empty. Clara was still there, standing, holding the letter and the ring, like someone holding their heart in their own hands. She looked up at the grey sky and let the tears come. It wasn't weakness, it was love. Love, in its rawest form, the way you know the other needs to go, even when everything inside you screams for them to stay. That day, Clara returned home alone. The house that still held his smell, his notes, their plans. He sat down on the bed, looked at the wire ring on his finger, and whispered, "Come back to me, Leon." Outside, the war was already beginning to claim its first names. But inside, in silence, Clara did what she could. She waited. And I prayed that that love, born in simplicity, would be strong enough to survive distance, time, and the brutality of war. In the first few months, the letters were like little sparks of life in the darkness. Clara ran to the mailbox every day with her heart racing, waiting for an envelope with Leon's name on it. And almost always, he was there. Sometimes it was just a few hurried lines, written between one patrol and another. Other times, entire pages would come full of details of what he saw, felt, dreamed. He talked about his colleagues, about the biting cold, about the endless marches, but he always ended by saying that he thought about her before going to sleep. Clara read each letter as if they were prayers. He kept them all in a wooden box under his bed. He read it again when the longing was pressing, when uncertainty threatened to crush his hope. Leon's every word was a thread that still connected them, a bridge between the devastated world where he was and the life she kept alive for when he returned. But little by little, the gap between letters began to grow. First, it was a week without news. Then, 2. Clara tried to convince herself that it was just the distance, the chaos of war, maybe problems at the post office. But her heart, previously full of faith, began to worry. When a new letter finally arrived, the relief was like a warm breath in a harsh winter. But there was something different about those words. Leon looked tired. The sentences were short. The thoughts were scattered. He talked less about what he saw and more about what he felt. Fear, discouragement, longing. Some days here seemed to last weeks. Others pass like the blink of an eye. Sometimes I wake up not knowing what day it is, but I always remember you. Your face saves me. After this letter, silence returned, and it stayed. Clara waited. One day, 2/7/20. I went to the mailbox every morning with the same hope and came back with the same emptiness. He started having nightmares. She dreamed of trains that left without returning, with letters burning in her hands, with Leon calling her through explosions. He woke up sweating, his chest tight, the wire ring still on his finger. People around were starting to get on with their lives. The city adapted to the absence of its young people. The war was still far away geographically, but close enough to shape routines, silent smiles, swallowed dreams. Some women received news of losses, others from injured people. Some didn't even know what to think, like Clara. She tried to fill the silence with occupations. She taught as if she were whole, but inside, she was a fragile fragment. I read Leon's old letters at night, trying to find clues, as if I could guess where he was now. Sometimes I wrote to him, even without knowing if the letters would arrive. Today the sky was beautiful, Leon, so blue it hurt. I thought about you. I always do. I still keep your scent on my pillow. I still count the days like they're bringing you back. But the days just piled up, and the mailbox remained empty. Clara began to understand a new type of suffering. It wasn't exactly pain. It was absence. A hole where the sound of his voice should be. The feeling of his hand entwined with hers. Absence is different from death, because death is certainty. Absence is cruel because it feeds on doubt. The other girls in the city, many in a similar situation, exchanged complicit glances at fairs, in markets, in church pews, but none of them said out loud what they feared. Most, that the silence of the letters might mean the end. Time, that silent thief, continued its work. It took away the leaves of the trees, the smells of the seasons, the details of the beloved face. Clara held on to what she could, to the sound of his laugh that still echoed in the memory, to the sound of the last farewell at the station, to the promise that he would return. But even memory begins to fade when the silence goes on too long. One night, Clara went to the oak tree on the hill, the same one where they had exchanged their first "I love you," where he had asked her to marry him with a handmade ring. She sat under the tree, with the old letters piled on her lap, and cried. Not an explosive, desperate cry, but a contained, silent cry, like someone who has been crying inside for months, and is only now letting it overflow. She didn't know where Leon was, if it still was, but I knew I loved him, and I knew I needed to keep going, not for giving up, but for survival. And so, the silence of the letters became part of her life, a noisy, constant void, a silent sound that accompanied every step, every thought. His absence was like a shadow, present even on sunny days. His absence did not stop time. Clara, even without wanting to, was swept away by the current of the days. Life, cruel in its inflexible routine, went on, and she needed to get on with it. Even though with every step I felt like I was leaving something behind, even if the heart screamed silently for someone who might never come back. The first step was to return to the classroom. The students were still there, waiting for the stories, the lessons, the laughter contained between one exercise and another. Clara put on the blue dress that Leon said highlighted her eyes and went. He sat down at his desk, took a deep breath, and smiled at the children, a shaky but present smile. That's what she had to offer at that moment. He taught letters, corrected notebooks, put stars on good essays, all with the same sweetness, but inside there was another narrative unfolding. Every word written on the board, every question answered, every laugh contained. Everything was an attempt to maintain sanity, of holding the ends of a frayed heart. Leon's letters had stopped arriving almost 2 months ago. Silence had become a character in his routine. Clara learned to live with it, even though every day, when she passed in front of the mailbox, she felt her stomach turn with the foolish hope of finding something there. At night, I prepared dinner as if he were still there. He would place 2 plates on the table, sometimes even pour 2 glasses of water, before he realized it. It was a hard habit to break. Her love was still there, alive, present, even if the man she loved was missing somewhere in the world, swallowed by war. People in the city began to comment, in low voices, but Clara listened. Poor girl, still waiting. Some offered well-meaning advice, others just looked away. Time was passing, and no one waited forever. At least, not in that world where the future was so uncertain. It was on an autumn afternoon that Clara met again Miguel, a childhood friend, son of the city's pharmacist, who had returned after years living in the capital. He saw her at the fair, with a basket of apples in her hands and greeted her with a sincere smile. They talked right there, between vegetable stands and the smell of fresh bread. Miguel was kind. He didn't bring up the subject of the war. He didn't ask questions about Leon. He just talked, laughed with her, made funny comments about rainy days or the cat that slept on the church roof. And for a few minutes, Clara forgot. They started to meet frequently, first by chance, then by intention. They walked to the river, as they did when they were children. Clara felt guilty at first, as if smiling next to another man would betray Leon. But Miguel never forced anything. It was just there, and this presence, light and constant, began to fill gaps that the silence had left. Still, Clara refused to take the wire ring off her finger. It was like a shield, a reminder, a link. No matter what happened, Leon was part of it. Even without knowing if he still lived, she carried him with her. The seasons kept changing. The children grew up. The school gained new staff. The war was still raging in the distance. Clara learned to wake up every day, make coffee, take care of chores, teach, smile when necessary. He learned to live without knowing, and that was, perhaps, the greatest lesson that life gave him. On some colder nights, she still wrote letters that might never be read. But writing was like talking to him. She told her about the day, about her fears, about how Miguel made her laugh, and how guilty she felt about it. One night he wrote, "Leon, I'm still waiting for you, but the wait has changed shape. It doesn't hurt like it used to. Sometimes, it scares me how much I can continue, as if, somehow, you were still here, inside me. I'm still afraid of forgetting you, and even more afraid of stopping loving you." Clara wasn't sure if this was betrayal or survival. "I just knew that, despite everything, I was learning to live." Life hadn't stopped because of her pain, and she, little by little, began to realize that perhaps she could follow too. She still loved him, but love, like time, also changes shape. And this story has already touched your heart so far. I now invite you to be part of this journey with me. Leave a like. It shows that this type of content deserves to continue being told. And subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapter of this plot that is just beginning. You are faced with a story that talks about love, loss, hope, and difficult choices. And what comes next will move you even more. In the next chapter, Clara finds herself faced with something unthinkable. A new name, a new face, a man who appears in the void left by Leon. Will she resist? Can love be reborn even when there is still a shadow in the heart? Stay with me. The sequel is exciting, and I guarantee what will happen next. You are not prepared to feel it. Let's go together until the end of this story. Time, silent and relentless, continued its course, and with it came changes, some subtle, others brutal. Clara was no longer the same girl who said goodbye at the station with her eyes full of hope. She was still strong, she was still sweet, but something inside her had reconfigured itself. Leon's silence had created spaces, and life, with its insistent continuity, always finds a way to fill gaps. It was on a random late afternoon that Miguel crossed his path again. Once again, he was there as if he demanded nothing, but offered everything: presence, listening, kindness. Miguel was the opposite of war. While the world burned with destruction, it was calm, it was peace. And Clara, although reluctant, began to allow small moments with him. There were no promises, there were no kisses. There were long conversations on the porch, hot tea in hands, shy laughs between stories from the past. Miguel knew how to listen, and perhaps that was what Clara needed most. Someone who didn't ask what if, but was simply there. People in the city started to notice. They commented with curious smiles, as if they were watching an inevitable unfolding. "Clara deserves to be happy," they said, and she listened, but didn't respond, because within it, there was a silent battlefield. Leon was still there. In every letter kept, in every whispered prayer, in every heartbeat. He hadn't died, not officially, at least. But the silence that had dragged on for more than 4 months spoke louder than any confirmed absence. And Miguel was a presence. It was certainty. It was a new name and a new face that began to occupy spaces that previously belonged only to Leon. One afternoon, as they walked together along the dirt road that led to the river, Miguel stopped in front of an old oak tree. "Have you ever brought anyone here before?" he asked, smiling. Clara was silent. That was her place with Leon, the place where he had asked her to marry him, where they had dreamed together. But now, she was there with another man, and he felt the weight of it in his chest. "Miguel," she began, hesitantly, "there are things that I still don't know if I can leave behind." He nodded. "I'm not asking you to forget. Just allow me to be here, however I can. I know I'm not him, but I'm alive, and I admire you so much for everything you are, even carrying everything you carry." These words echoed in Clara's mind for days, because he didn't want to replace, he didn't want to erase Leon. He just wanted to be by her side, in any way possible. Clara returned home and took the sealed letter that Leon had left with her on the day of her departure. I hadn't read it yet. It was to be read only if necessary. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, she asked herself, would this be the moment? But something inside her still resisted. There was something definitive about opening that letter, as if, by doing so, he was ending a cycle prematurely. And she wasn't ready yet, not completely. In the following days, she and Miguel started to see each other more frequently. He took her to school, helped with the garden in the backyard, repaired the roof, small gestures that, together, began to build a new routine. And Clara, between guilt and consolation, began to allow herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. One night, after dinner, Miguel held her hand. I didn't say anything. It just held, and she didn't pull it back. The silence between them was light, warm, different from the silence that the war left. It was a silence of someone who didn't need to say everything to make themselves understood. But that same night, before going to sleep, Clara dreamed about Leon again. He appeared in the fog, dirty, injured, but smiling. And it just said, "You're still my home." She woke up with tears in her eyes and a heart divided between two worlds that should never have crossed. In the mirror, he saw a new woman. He still loved Leon. Maybe he always did, but he couldn't ignore what was beginning to emerge there, before his eyes and in his heart. Miguel was not the past. It was a possibility for the future. The hardest part wasn't choosing between two men. It was understanding that, sometimes, life forces us to choose between what was taken from us and what is being offered now. And there, on the threshold between memory and hope, Clara began to accept that, perhaps, loving again was not a betrayal, but a way of staying alive. Clara's love for Leon had not died. It was important to recognize this. It still pulsed inside her like a discreet flame, protected by the glass of time and longing. But that flame was no longer a fire. It didn't burn like before. It didn't consume his thoughts every moment. He didn't tighten his chest. Every day, it was still there, just smaller, more contained, less present. Leon's prolonged absence, combined with the silence in the letters, had left deep marks. As much as Clara tried to keep hope alive, the truth is that the war had taken more than just news. It had also taken part of the connection between them. The invisible thread that united them began to fray. Clara noticed this in the little things. Before, she spoke to Leon even in her mind. In every decision, in every doubt, I imagined what he would say, how he would react. But now, sometimes days went by without her mentioning it even to herself. When she realized it, she felt guilty, as if she was failing the promise she had made at the station. "I will wait for you." But what to do when the wait becomes an abyss? When there are no more answers, no signs, not even dreams? She still read the old letters, but with different eyes. He no longer lost himself in passionate words with the same fervor. Now I read them with nostalgia and gratitude, like someone leafing through a diary from a beautiful time, but which seems to belong to another life. And in a way, that was it. The Clara who loved Leon with all her strength was a woman from before the war. The one that existed now was different. One that learned to survive from the broken pieces, who learned to rebuild himself with silence. And there was Miguel. Miguel didn't take Leon's place. It was impossible, but it occupied a new space. A space built not on promises of the past, but on gestures of the present. He didn't say, "I will love you forever," but he was there every morning, helping carry the bags of flour, cleaning the leaves from the roof, listening to the school children recite poetry. Clara began to realize that loving Leon was like loving a ghost, someone who perhaps no longer existed, at least not in the way she remembered, because war changes people. Clara knew that, and if Leon were alive, who would he be now? That question haunted her more than his absence. One Sunday afternoon, while preparing bread, Clara found herself humming. It was an old melody, which she and Miguel had heard together in the square. It was at that moment that something inside her broke once and for all. It wasn't sadness. It was the acceptance that her love for Leon had changed. It still existed, but it no longer prevented her from living. She sat down, her hands covered in flour, and cried silently. He cried for everything that could have been, for all the promises made under the oak, for the plans that did not survive the war. She cried because that's what love is, not just a feeling, but also a constant goodbye to what couldn't be. After crying, she felt lighter, as if some of the weight he had been carrying for so long had finally dissolved. Miguel arrived later that day, with a wildflower in his hands. It wasn't a special date. He only found it beautiful on the way. He handed it to her with a shy smile, and Clara, for the first time, felt like really hugging him. No guilt, no conflict, just with gratitude. That night, she dreamed about Leon again. But this time, he wasn't hurt, nor was he calling out to her. He was just there, smiling from a distance, like someone who understands. And in the dream, she whispered, "Forgive me." And he nodded, with eyes full of tenderness, as if to say, "You didn't betray me. You just learned to live." Clara woke up with her heart at peace. The wire ring was still on her finger. She wouldn't take it off, not out of attachment, but out of respect, because that love, although weakened, was still part of who she was. It didn't need to be ripped out or forgotten, just placed in its rightful place, the past. The love for Leon had not died, but it was no longer the center. Now, it was a beautiful memory, an important chapter, a starting point. And for the first time in a long time, Clara looked to the future without fear. It was on a clear morning, when the clouds seemed to have given the world a break, that he returned. No announcement, no letter, no warning whatsoever. It just appeared, a figure on the dusty road, coming from afar, staggering, carrying with it the weight of lost years. Leon was back. Clara's heart almost stopped when she saw that man approaching the school gate, where she was arranging the benches for the outdoor class. For a moment, she thought her eyes were betraying her, that your mind, tired of waiting so much, was creating a mirage. But when he stopped, his eyes fixed on her, Clara knew it was him. Not the same as before, but still, Leon. He was thinner. The face, once soft and youthful, now bore hard features, aged by pain and survival. The grown beard, the sunken eyes, the skin marked by the sun, cold, and perhaps by memories that he would never be able to tell completely. But it was Leon, and he had returned. Clara didn't know what to do. She stood still, her hand still holding a damp cloth. Time froze there, between the two. There was no rush, no immediate hug. There was amazement, shock, and most of all, doubt. As if that reunion, so dreamed of for so long, was now out of place. Out of place. He walked towards her in silence. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost broken. "I said I would come back." She felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "Leon, my God," was all he could say. And so, they stood there, in front of each other, trying to recognize who they had become, trying to remember who they had been. Leon looked down for a moment, as if he was embarrassed for taking so long. He carried only a battered bag and a folded letter, the one he had promised to send if everything went wrong. But he never sent it. He kept it with him throughout the war, as a reminder of what awaited him, or what he thought he still expected. "Clara, I thought about you every day. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to return, but you were the only thing that kept me going." She heard this with a tight chest. It was everything I ever wanted to hear, but now it sounded like an echo from another time. From a time that no longer existed. Clara invited him in, prepared tea. They sat at the kitchen table as before, but it wasn't like before. Leon told fragments of what he had experienced. The battlefield, the wounded, the friends who didn't return. He had been captured for a while, escaped. He remained hidden in distant villages until he managed to return. An odyssey. A miracle, perhaps, but a late miracle. She listened to everything with tears in her eyes, but with a divided heart. I felt compassion, gratitude that he was alive, but something inside her had already changed. The place where Leon lived was no longer the same. When he finished the story, Clara was silent. Leon reached out his hand and held hers, as if he wanted to recover everything there, in that touch. "You still wear the ring. Does that mean you waited for me?" Clara took a deep breath. He looked at his hand. Yes, the ring was still there. But what did he represent now? I waited for you, Leon. I waited as long as I could. I waited with all my might. But life, it didn't stop. And I changed. He withdrew his hand, slowly. His eyes, once vibrant, now seemed to water. There was no anger there, just pain, a pain he couldn't name. Because he had come back expecting to find everything in place. But he found a world that went on without him. Is there anyone? He asked, almost in a whisper. Clara hesitated. But I knew I needed to be honest. He has, and he arrived when everything was dark. It helped me to continue. It taught me that living is not about betraying those who were left behind. Leon lowered his eyes. It was silent for a long time. I thought of everything, Clara, less on that. I thought about war, about death, about losing my legs, my mind. But I never thought about losing you. She approached, touched his face affectionately. And in that touch there was everything. Ancient love, respect, compassion, sadness. But there was no more desire. There was no longer that living flame. You didn't lose me, Leon. He just didn't find me in the same place. I love you, but in a different way now. He nodded, with difficulty, as if that broke something inside him. But Leon was a man of war. And, in a way, knowing that Clara was alive, well, happy, even if with someone else, was victory enough. That night, he slept in a makeshift guest room. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't force anything. He knew that, after everything, his biggest battle would be against the time that had passed. And perhaps, this was the only one he couldn't win. Leon returned to the city as a stranger in his own story. When he left, he was the young man from the bakery, known by everyone, loved for his courage and unshakable love for Clara. But when he returned, years later, he was greeted by discreet glances, whispers in the corners of the fair, and a type of silence that weighs more than any words. It was as if time had built a new world, and he hadn't been invited to be a part of it. The streets were different, although they were still the same. The square where I used to meet Clara now had new benches. The school where she taught had gained more rooms. His father's bakery had closed after the old man's death, a detail that Leon only learned about from third parties, as there was no longer any member of his family there. The war hadn't just taken away his time and youth, it had taken away everything he knew. Walking through the alleys was like visiting a faded memory. The colors were all a little different, the voices lower. The faces, for the most part, are unknown. And those who recognized him looked at him with a mixture of pity and embarrassment, as if they didn't know exactly how to receive it. After all, what do you say to a man who has returned from war to find his life already rewritten? Leon tried to make sense of being back. He spent his mornings walking around the city, watching, listening. Sometimes I sat on the bandstand in the square and just stayed. People passed by, some waved, others just looked away, respecting that invisible space that forms around those who carry more past than present. During these walks, he saw Miguel for the first time. It was a weak, sunny afternoon. Clara was coming down the street, her hair tied up delicately, a book in her arms. Miguel was next to her, smiling, saying something that made her laugh. It was a light, sincere laugh, full of life, and Leon felt his heart fail for an instant. That laugh had already been yours. Now, it was from another time. He didn't come any closer. He just watched from afar, standing behind a tree, as if spying on a lost dream. And at that moment, he didn't feel angry. He just missed it. Not from Clara, but from what they had been, of what could have been. The war did not kill them with bullets, but with distance. The next day he went to church. He sat in the last pews, his gaze fixed on the altar. He was not a man of faith, at least not the kind who goes to services. But there, in silence, he said the only prayer he knew how to say. He asked for strength to accept what he couldn't change. The priest, a soft-spoken old man, recognized him. She sat next to him after Mass. Not everyone comes back, Leon, and not everyone who comes back in one piece. But you came back, and that is something. Leon looked at him, his eyes teary, and whispered, "Returning is not the same as belonging." The priest nodded. "Then find another place to belong. Maybe it's not where you expected, but it can still be beautiful." Those words stayed with him, more than any letter, more than any greeting. That night, Clara invited him to dinner again. Miguel was there too. The environment was not hostile. On the contrary, he was serene, respectful. Miguel extended his hand to Leon, firm, sincere, and Leon pressed it without looking away. Here were two men who had loved the same woman and, in their own way, wanted what was best for her. During dinner, they talked about simple things: the market, the school, the weather. Leon listened more than he spoke. I observed Clara's gestures, the looks between her and Miguel, the complicity that had formed, and although it hurt, he recognized it. It was love. Not the same love he had known, but love nonetheless. When he finished, Leon thanked him and said goodbye. Clara accompanied him to the gate. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Sincerely, thank you for having me, and for still being kind to me." She held his hand for a moment. "You will always be part of me, Leon. Nothing erases what we live." He smiled, a sad but real smile. "I know, and that's already more than many people have." And then, he walked down the street, lighter than the days before, still not knowing exactly where I would go, still not sure of anything, but with a new understanding. Sometimes, going back doesn't mean taking back what you had. It means learning to find a new place even in the land where you were born. It was inevitable. One day, they would need to talk, alone, without the noise of the city, without other people's eyes, without Miguel, without memories intervening all the time. Clara knew that. Leon too. As difficult as it was, that meeting needed to happen, not out of obligation, but out of respect for everything they had experienced. It was Clara who took the initiative. On a Wednesday afternoon, he sent a short note to the Modest Inn where Leon had been staying since his return. "Tomorrow, after school, at the Oak." And so, the next day, at the end of classes, Clara went to the hill where it all began. The old oak stood firm, like a sentinel from the past. I had been witness to the first kiss, the impromptu marriage proposal, the vows that seemed eternal. Now, it would be the stage for a conversation that neither of them wanted, but both knew was necessary. Leon arrived shortly after, walking slowly. He was carrying a small box in his hands. When he saw Clara, he stopped for a moment, took a deep breath, and walked towards her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, not a single word was spoken, because the eyes said everything: pain, affection, admiration, longing, and, above all, acceptance. They sat under the shade of the tree. The wind was blowing lightly, and the smell of the countryside felt strangely familiar. For a few minutes, they just sat in silence. Clara was the first to speak. "I never imagined this moment would be like this." "Neither do I," he replied, looking at the horizon. "When you left, everything stopped, and I waited for you, Leon. I waited with everything I had. But, over time," she paused, searching for the right words. "Life happened." Leon nodded. There was no hurt in his eyes, just sadness, but a peaceful sadness, like the one that comes when you understand that not everything is as you want. "I know," he said, "and I don't blame you. Not at all. I just needed to see you, hear from you, understanding with my own eyes that everything was okay, or almost everything." She smiled, sweetly. "I felt guilty, so many times, but I began to understand that guilt has no place when we just survived." Leon opened the small box he was carrying. Inside were the letters that Clara had sent, some crumpled, others almost illegible, but all kept like treasures, and, at the bottom, the wire ring. "I kept everything. Every difficult day, I read one, out loud, and I remembered you, your smile, our home that never existed. That's what kept me going," he said, his voice breaking. "But now, I think I need to give this back to you." She took the box carefully. He didn't take the ring off his finger. He just ran his fingers over the cards. He felt the weight of the past, and she was grateful for being loved so deeply. "What we experienced was real. It was beautiful, and it will never stop being," she said firmly. "But today, Leon, I'm different. And you too." He agreed. "In the war, I saw things that changed who I was. When I came back, I thought I could pick up where I left off. But I realized that time doesn't wait. And, in a way, that's good, because you're fine. He's happy. And if it had been with someone other than Miguel, I might have rebelled. But he is a good man." Clara smiled, excited. "Yeah, he is. But you will always be my first great love. Nothing will change that." Leon looked at her tenderly. And, for the first time since returning, he smiled lightly. A smile of someone who accepts from those who understand, who says goodbye with a peaceful heart. "Maybe we were a love that existed to teach," he said, "not to last." but to show what it means to truly love. She nodded. The two got up and hugged each other for a long time, not as a couple, but like two survivors of the same story. When they walked away, they didn't say goodbye, they just smiled, because they knew that, from now on, their lives would follow different paths. But that meeting, on that hill, sealed everything with a delicacy that only true loves, even those that don't end up together, can have. Leon walked down the road with firm steps, as if he finally had somewhere to step. Clara stayed there for a while longer, under the oak, looking at the horizon. And, for the first time, he felt that the past could finally rest. The encounter on the hill had left silent marks. No tears were shed in front of the oak, but Clara knew what she and Leon had experienced there was a farewell, undeclared, unofficial, but definitive. That hug closed not just a chapter, but an era. And even then, there was something unfinished. There were words that had not yet been said, pains that remained hidden by the maturity of the reunion, and a part of her needed to speak. I needed to say out loud everything that, for so long, was trapped between fear, guilt, and silence. It wasn't enough to just see Leon. She needed to talk, look into his eyes, and this time, tell the whole truth, without filters, without protection, without mincing words. It was on a Saturday night, a few days after the hill, that Clara went to the inn where Leon was staying. The sky was clear, the moon high. She hesitated in front of the door for a few minutes. He almost came back, but it hit. Leon opened it. He was barefoot, wearing a simple shirt, his hair messy. He smiled when he saw her, but the smile was cautious. Clara entered and sat on a wooden chair against the wall. He sat in front of her silently, waiting. "I needed to talk to you," she began. In truth, he can talk, always could. Clara stared at her own intertwined fingers. He took a deep breath. "When you left, everything was on pause. You know, I waited for you with every part of me, as far as I got. But when the silence of your letters prolonged, I began to break down inside. I started to feel angry, Leon. Anger at war, anger at myself, anger that I loved you so much that you forgot about me." Leon listened without interrupting. His eyes never left hers. "I prayed every night for you to come back, but at the same time, I was afraid of what I would find if you came back. Fear of not being the same anymore. Afraid of disappointing you." She swallowed dryly. "And that's what happened." He leaned forward a little. "You never let me down, Clara. Never." "I feel like that sometimes," she admitted. "Because even though I knew it wasn't my fault, I fell in love again. And that still hurts me. Not by Miguel, but for you, for everything we built, for everything we couldn't finish." Leon nodded slowly. "I also wondered what I would have done if you had moved on. And the truth is, I didn't know what to expect. I wanted to find you exactly as I left you, but that would be unfair, selfish, because I've lived through hell, but so have you, and yours was silent and constant." Clara breathed, feeling her throat tighten. "I still love you, but not in the same way. And I needed to tell you that looking into your eyes, you were the great love of my life, Leon. Only now, you are a part of me, no longer the whole." The silence that followed was long, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that appears when truths are told, and all that's left is to accept. Leon ran his hand through his hair. "I thought I would come back, and that you would be there, waiting for me. But now I see that time has passed, that you have grown, and that maybe what we had only existed at that time, and that's okay." She looked at him, relieved, because there, finally, was understanding. "You were my home," she said, with teary eyes, "and perhaps it always will be. But today, I chose to build another one. And that doesn't mean I loved you any less. It just means that I survived." He slowly got up and walked to the window. The moon illuminated part of his face, revealing the furrows left by the war. "The war taught me how to fight, surviving, forgetting myself. But I think the hardest thing was learning to lose. And now, I'm learning to lose you, slowly, in peace." Clara also got up. He approached him. He touched his hand. "You didn't lose me. He just found me somewhere else." They hugged, and this time, the hug was stronger, more intimate, like two old friends who love each other deeply, but know that their paths now go in different directions. "Thanks for coming," Leon whispered, "for saying everything, for being honest. This is worth more than any happy ending." She smiled, Sometimes the truth is the best ending. When she left the room, Clara felt light-hearted. That conversation, the most difficult of all, had freed them both. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about following. With dignity, with affection, with respect, and that, in itself, was already a type of love. The day after the conversation, Clara walked around the city with a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't exactly happiness, but a serene relief. A weight had been lifted not just from my shoulders, but from my soul. Facing Leon, opening her heart, listening to his pain and revealing her own. That was what finally freed her from years of silence. Their story had received the closure it deserved. And for Leon, that closure was not the end. It was the beginning of something new, albeit undefined. He understood, now, that the war had not only stolen his time with Clara, she had changed them both in different ways. And neither of them were to blame for that. The next morning, Leon wrote a letter. Not because I expected it to be read with tears or kept forever, but because I needed to say what was left, calmly. He left her at Clara's door before sunrise. Clara found her late in the afternoon, returning from school. He sat down on the bench on the porch, opened the envelope and read, "Clara, this letter is different from the ones I wrote during the war. It is not full of desperate longing, nor of promises for a future we do not know. It's just a simple letter from a man who came back more broken than he imagined, but who now understands. You were my salvation in many moments. Your words kept me alive. Your memory gave me strength. And even now, knowing that you are okay, that you followed, comforts me. Because true love, I realized, doesn't require possession. He wants the other person's happiness, even if it means giving up. I forgive you, if that is still necessary. Not because you loved someone else, because that was never a mistake, but because you carried guilt for something you never deserved. And I forgive myself too, for leaving and believing that time would wait for us. The war made me believe that if I lived, everything would be fine, but life is more complex. Thank you for everything. Thank you for loving me the way you did, for waiting for me, for letting me go when you saw it was right. I don't take you as a hurt, but as a sweet memory, and I will live with that, with gratitude, with affection. Leon." Clara read the letter until the end without interrupting. When he finished, he closed his eyes and let the tears come. Not of pain, but of recognition. That was love in its purest form, the one that understands, that forgives, that does not charge, that accepts the other in all its phases. She put the letter in the same box where she kept the old ones, now wrapped with a blue ribbon. It was a symbol, a closure, a life that had not been in vain. Days later, Leon decided it was time to go. The city was too small to rebuild life amid memories. He needed fresh air, space, a place where he could stop being the man who came back from the war and just be Leon. Before leaving, he went to the school to say goodbye to Clara. He waited until the end of class, when the children had already left. She saw him at the door and smiled, that light smile of someone who doesn't hold resentment. "Are you really going?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Necessary. Here everything has you. And I need to figure out who I am now. Beyond that," she nodded. "I understand." Leon hugged her one last time, a firm, sincere hug. There was love there still, but a different love. A love that had become respect, affection, shared history. "Thank you, Clara, for everything, and for forgiving me too." She looked him in the eyes. There was nothing to forgive. "You're back." And he was brave enough to face it all. This, Leon-ness, is more noble than any victory on the field. He smiled, this time, for real, and then he left. No tears, no dramatic scene, no promise of return. Just left, because sometimes, the greatest gesture of love you can have for someone is to let them go in peace. And that, Clara understood deeply. That same day, Clara sat with Miguel on the balcony, under the pink evening sky. She told him everything, calmly. Miguel listened, without interrupting. In the end, he just held her hand. "Are you well?" he asked. "For the first time in a long time." "I am," she replied. And, in that shared silence, she realized that true love doesn't fear the past. He welcomes, understands, and builds the present based on the truths that life delivers. There was no crowd at the station, no handkerchiefs waved, no promises shouted against the noise of the train. Just the clear sky, the sound of the tracks, and the silence of a man who, for the second time, was leaving that city. But this time, it wasn't the war that took him, it was life. Leon didn't carry a heavy bag. He only had a backpack with some clothes, some books, and the box with Clara's letters, which now represented something different. No longer the hope of a return, but the certainty that a love lived truly is never lost. He wasn't going away, running away from the pain, but going to find himself. At the ticket office, he bought a ticket to a neighboring city. Not too far, but far enough to breathe. Leon needed anonymity, no longer being Clara's boy or the soldier who came back too late. I just wanted to be Leon, just like that. A man who lost, yes, but also survived. And I was willing to start over. As he waited, he looked around. The station seemed smaller now. The old walls, the worn wooden platform, the benches with names scrawled on them, everything seemed to contain a piece of him, a piece of what he had been before the war. Now, he left there not only memories, but also the weight he carried on his shoulders for so long. He remembered the day he left for the first time. Clara cried, holding her hands like someone trying to hold on to destiny. He had promised to return, and he came back. But he never imagined that the return would not be a restart, but rather a closure. War, he realized too late, doesn't just destroy cities. She devours life's pauses. And when you come back, what used to be a pause is now another story. It was at that time, between reflections and memories, that he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Clara, alone, with a light coat and her hair tied up simply, as she always did on cold days. There was something in her eyes, not sadness, not joy, but something deep, a kind of peace. "I thought you would come without saying goodbye," she said, with a slight smile. "I thought it would be easier that way," he replied. "Maybe it was, but it wouldn't be fair." Leon nodded. She approached and stood next to him, her eyes focused on the tracks, as if she also wanted to keep that moment in silence. "Do you already know where you're going?" she asked. "Not yet. I'll start slowly, working with your hands. Maybe in a workshop, maybe in a field. I need land, real things. After living in fear for so long, I want to learn to live calmly." She smiled. "You'll make it. You are strong. Not as much as you. You stayed, survived the void, and I knew how to love again. This requires more courage than facing any battle." They stayed there for a few more minutes, taking their time. Time seemed to stretch just to allow that farewell. There were no kisses, no promises. Just two hearts that recognized each other, and now knew when to let go. The train whistled in the distance. Leon turned to her. He lightly touched her face with his fingertips. There was no desire, but affection. That gesture was a kind of silent blessing. "Thank you for everything, Clara, for being my home, and for showing me that I can build another. You will always be a part of me, Leon. It doesn't matter where we are. It will live with me, in some quiet corner of my heart." He smiled, his eyes moist. "Take good care of him," he said, referring to Miguel. "He loves you, it can be seen, and you deserve it. A love that stays." She nodded. "And you deserve enough love that starts again, that you don't have to come back from anywhere." The train arrived. The doors opened with a metallic click. Leon picked up his backpack, took one last look around, and then went upstairs. Clara stood still on the platform. He didn't wave. He just kept his eyes fixed until the train disappeared around the curve. The wind blew lightly, and in that breath, she felt something come out of her. An old pain, a stagnant longing, a silent guilt. Leon left in silence. But he left peace in the place where there was absence before. And Clara stayed, not expecting anything anymore, not regretting anything anymore, just living, with a heart that, despite being scarred, beat with hope, with love, truly. Leon continued his journey with a lighter heart, but there was still something inside the backpack that weighed more than any memory. A letter written on the battlefield, on one of the most difficult days of his life. He had guarded it jealously, with fear, with hope, but he never sent it. The letter was for Clara. It was written in a makeshift shelter, by the light of a fading candle, amid the distant sound of explosions. It was the night Leon thought he wouldn't come back. He was injured, feverish, and the world around him seemed ready to fall apart. Nothing was certain, just the desire, if he didn't come back, to leave at least a part of him with her. Now, years later, in that new city where he was starting his life again, Leon opened the sealed envelope again. The edges were yellowed, the paint slightly faded. He read, for the first time since he had written it, the words he never had the courage to deliver. "My Clara, if you are reading this letter, it is because something has gone wrong. Or maybe I've finally accepted that I won't be returning. I don't know what day it is. I lost count. I just know that outside, everything seems cold and dark, and inside, what keeps me warm is your memory. I don't know how to explain what I experienced here. I don't think I even want to. Some memories are not meant to be shared. They just exist and accompany us. But through it all, you have always been my shelter. I write to tell you that you saved me, that the memory of our days, of your hands adjusting my collar, of your laughter on Sundays at the market, that was what kept me upright. While many gave up, I clung to you. If I don't come back, Clara, follow. Please follow. Love again. Build the life we dreamed of, even if with other hands. Don't carry guilt. You are too much light to live in the shadow of an absence. And if one day you find someone who looks at you the way I looked at you, with admiration, with tenderness, with that silent certainty that you are my home, then don't hesitate. Go with an open heart. Because if I loved you, Clara, it was so that you could learn to love again. Thank you for everything, for every gesture, every word, every wait. My greatest comfort, at the end of it all, is knowing that I was loved by you. With all my love, Leon. Leon folded the letter again, but this time he didn't put it in his backpack. He placed it on the simple table in the guest house where he was staying. He looked at her for a few minutes. The letter had already served its purpose, and maybe, now, he could let her go. The next day he left in the morning and walked to the river in the new city, the same kind of river he and Clara used to visit. He sat on the bank, watched the current, and then carefully released the letter, letting the water carry it away. Not as a lament, but as a rite of passage. Those words no longer needed to be delivered, because everything that was written, in some way, had already been experienced. Clara, in turn, continued her life in peace. She dedicated herself to school, took care of the house with Miguel, walked barefoot in the garden, and sometimes sat under the oak, just to think. She never knew the existence of that letter, but deep down, she felt that Leon still carried her with him, not as an absence, but as a subtle, gentle presence that had been important and now rested in peace. Time passed, the two followed, in different worlds, but with the same feeling, gratitude, and so ends the story of a love that was interrupted, but never wasted. A love that taught, that shaped, that strengthened. A love that, even though it didn't last forever, lived long enough to be eternal in the memory of the two hearts that shared it. Because there are stories that don't need to end together to be complete. And there are letters that, even though never delivered, say everything that needs to be said. If this story touched you in any way, if it awakened memories, brought tears, hope, or understanding, I ask you something simple. Give back, leave a like, share with someone who also needs to feel all of this, and subscribe to the channel. This helps me continue to bring you stories that not only entertain, but transform. Here, each video is made to touch the heart, to remember that, even between losses and new beginnings, true love leaves marks that time never erases. Thanks for being here, and until the next story.